and introduce you, Denise, and get us going because people really want to hear from you. But I'm so happy to have the Reverend Dr. Denise Kingdom-Grier with us today. I met with her last fall, and it was like the most exciting Zoom call that I have ever had. So fun. So I'm really looking forward to having her speak with all of you. We got to know about her through the Communities of Calling initiative of Collegeville Institute. And Dr. Grier did some work as part of the Vocation project, which is a sister project to Communities of Calling out of Hope College. And what she did was develop a curriculum for middle school girls called Vocation of a Freedom Fighter. And that right there had me. But what I was so fascinated by was how she grasped the calling of these young girls at a particular age and created faith formation around that that was really significant. I mean, it was something that they could build on for the rest of their lives. And that's the kind of formation that doesn't leave you. Just to give you a little bit of her background, Dr. Grier has a BA in psychology from Shaw and an MDiv and a doctorate in ministry from Western Theological Seminary. She's worked for many years as a social worker, becoming a child welfare specialist in foster care and adoption. And now she's doing that kind of work as a mission partner with a child placing agency in Botshabelo. Is that how am I saying it right? In South Africa. And she helps to provide stable homes for children in their own community so that they don't need to be in an orphanage. And there's just so much beautiful work flowing out of you. I'm really happy to welcome you to be with us. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Jane. Thank you. Yeah, I wish I could take credit for the work that's being done in South Africa. There's amazing staff of mostly women, all Black Indigenous women to that community who are doing incredible work amongst 30,000 orphans and 15,000 vulnerable children. And I just get to be their North American spokesperson and their biggest cheerleader. And so I'm looking forward to heading back down there on February 27th, the 2 years to the exact day since I actually returned home from my last visit right before COVID. So I'm grateful for that. In addition to that, I guess you can call me Denise. You don't have to call me Doctor unless you just feel like you want to. I'm perfectly happy with my friends calling me Denise, and I believe that we're all going to be friends in some way, shape, or form. But I'm also an ordained minister in the Reformed Church in America, and I have been for 17 years. Most recently, prior to my station now, I served at a Christian Reformed church partnership where I served there for 12 years. And that's really the context where this work came out of. Now I work for a church called Mars Hill Bible Church. And I've been here for a little over a year now. And I do like mobilization, community engagement, basically trying to figure out who's doing good work and giving them the money and the resources they need to be able to do that in some ways. So anyway, but the middle piece, the piece before I came here, I worked at this church called Maple Avenue Ministries, just a community church in the neighborhood, a church that I love deeply and adore and still do. My kids still go to church there. When I go there, they still roll out the red carpet. The Lord just moved me to a different place and a different station, and we all could affirm that. And we didn't have to leave mad. You know, people like to leave church mad. It's nothing like that. We still have a flourishing relationship. But while I was serving that church and that community as the first Black woman pastor there and all kind of things that people tell me that I am, I had the privilege to encounter these young girls who I just call fire starters. I mean, they just had this fierceness about them that inspired me such that I would say to them and to their parents, like, I would run into a burning building with them. Because I just believe that they have the power to do whatever the burning building calls for, and I want to bear witness to it, you know. And so I just didn't know what I was going to do with them, but I just knew that there was something to be done. And I've always, I guess because I was so inspired and shaped as a young person in church by mentors and other people who exposed us to certain things about history and about life that also engaged our faith. It was something that's so much always a part of who I was. So I've always been involved in that way. I've taken kids on college visits. My former husband and I, we've taken kids on trips around the world. We had a choir he had a choir. I don't sing. I just went along for the trip. But we went to Paris, we went to Japan, we went to China. We took these kids who had never even had a passport, never been on an airplane around the world, and so this has just always been such a real passion to expose these kids to something else. And so anyway, I had this group of girls and boys too, but mostly, I was drawn to the girls, and they were all different races and ethnicities and backgrounds, and it wasn't every girl. I mean, I loved them all, but there was those special ones. Their parents had the hardest time with them. It's probably what I identified with the most as a child. And I just knew there was something that I wanted to do. So what happened was we were introduced to the Vocation grant through Hope College, through Beth over there. And so we sat down, me and my team sat down to compose a project that would engage this whole idea of vocation and calling. And so we created like a whole year of a plan. It was in 2019, early 19, 18, I don't know, 2018 maybe it was. We came up with this plan, and we decided that we were going to start in the fall with a whole season of vocation, just like different vocations, and the vocation of a of a carpenter, or different people in biblical, the vocation of a prophet, the vocation of the priest. We just did a whole season. We just introduced our whole congregation, and we didn't necessarily have like a Sunday school. Our kids would go out once a month, but every other month they would be right there in the service with us. So they're on this journey with us. So we went through that whole like pre-Advent season, just introducing it to the church overall, went into Advent, included vocation in our Advent series. In January, we kicked off a marriage retreat. So marriage as vocation, right? So then we moved into that. And then after that, we started teeing up for this, this vocation of a freedom fighter involving our kids. So we have the whole congregation, we have the whole Advent thing, we have our married couples and our couples getting married. And now we're going to focus on, our young girls. So it must have been 2020 because as we know, COVID happened. And so I became antsy as I was just checking on my kids in a congregation to see how they were progressing academically, socially, emotionally, with being on screens and some still not on screens yet. And, I had a daughter who was a senior at the time, so she was dealing with her own kind of not being in school. And so I was just very, very concerned about that. And I just started thinking, how am I going to kind of hold some of these kids together and still feel like church? Because they don't want to sit and watch church on the screen in the same way some of the adults were. So I was like, how can I engage them? So I found, all the little girls that were kind of in the same age group, usually between like 5th grade and 8th grade. And I sent out an invitation to them, to their parents, to say, come on Zoom with me. I want to, invite you into a process. And, maybe about 11 or 12 of them in the beginning, I can't remember, came forward and said, their parents said, yes, they'd be willing to do that on Zoom. They're not Zoomed out yet, right? And so we did that, and we decided that we were going to read a book called Black Girl Dreaming. I'm going to share my screen with you so I can be efficient and kind of walk through this with you, because I tried to, let's see if I can share my screen. And this is this it? Okay, yes. And then boom, I like it when it works. Okay, so we decided, okay, so now we're going to talk about vocation, we're going to talk about calling, and we're going to talk about that as it relates to being a freedom fighter. Now, you all know, you probably remember that this is also the time when Ahmaud Arbery, the guy who was jogging, was murdered in the neighborhood. And shortly thereafter, George Floyd, right, was also murdered. So we are not, our church has been very, very vocal in terms of racial violence in our country. We've been a church that has had community forums and community conversations about our own sort of racial unrest in our community, which is called Holland, which is named that after the place in the Netherlands, which can tell you who holds most of the power here in our community. And in the African-American community is like maybe 8% of the population here, right? And so we thought it would be helpful for us to think about who freedom fighters are. And I was thinking about, in my own lament and sadness during that season in our country, was thinking about if we don't raise up freedom fighters in the next generation, we're not going to have them. And we even more so, I think now than then, with just like everything just being couched in critical race theory and everything just being shut down at the door and like rendered, just ineffective and divisive. And I believe some things are, but everything is not. But so libraries and people being banned and censored and all of that. So I feel like in this time, if we believe that freedom fighting in some sense is central to the gospel and core to the call of at least some people, if not all, then we're gonna have to, the church is gonna have to take that up and be about the business of doing that ourselves. And so that's what set me on this path. And Lily, through the Vocation Project, gave me the funding to be able, and not just the funding. I mean, Beth, who was our coordinator, Beth is also the one who's constantly fanned the flame on this project so that it's come to you. There's so many times that I'm like, I have other things to do. And she'd come back and she'd say, Denise, this is important. And Lily loves it. Everybody I talk to about loves it. Don't give up on it. And so I'm grateful for her and grateful for the generosity of the project. So the first step via Zoom was for us to read a book called Black Girl Dreaming. Now, as I said earlier, some of my girls are young white girls. I just use these categories. So they're white girls. And then I also have some Black girls who were born in Africa, but were adopted by white families here. They grew up here though. So I had that dynamic. And then I have a couple of biracial girls, and one of them is hilarious. She presents, if you see her, you think she's white. Her dad is biracial, her mom is white. So she's got blonde hair, but it's like the biggest curls, and you can imagine. And when you see that fierceness in her, you can recognize that her aunties and others have had an impact on how she lives in the world, right? So we call her our secret weapon. And so we have two girls who are biracial in different ways. And then we have two Black girls who have two Black parents, right? So this is sort of the demographic. All of these girls go to church together. All of them go to, all the things together. And we're all reading this book together in order to get some sort of common language and common understanding around the experience of being a Black girl in America. So this is autobiographical by Jacqueline Woodson, talking about, what it's like for her to grow up in her context and in her space. And so that gave us an opportunity to talk about via Zoom how those experiences were the same for some of us, for me growing up, or for some others, and then how it was very different from others. And, so we got to talk about that and themes and such as that. That was 12, you'll see it was. So that was just a way for us to kind of ground ourselves in who we are, our differences, our sameness, and then to also, for me to gauge a little bit of our interest in literacy, because everybody that can read doesn't like to read, right? So for me to kind of get a sense of where are we in terms of literacy, in terms of, so you didn't have to read it to come, but you have, in some sense, you had to read it in order to engage in the conversation, but we made it real, non-judgmental. And because I knew that the academic situation was already kind of bananas because of COVID, I didn't make it, I wasn't heavy-handed about it, but it did help us to engage in some great conversations. So that was kind of like the entree. And then when we finished with this book, then came the invitation to commitment to say, would you like to go on this journey as a freedom fighters living into this sense of call by God? Do you want to know more? Do you want to explore more? And all the girls didn't say yes. But 7 of the middle school girls did say yes. We want, sign me up. What does it take? So the very next thing we did was we delivered a freedom fighter toolkit to every child's home. And in that toolkit, you'll see here, there's a book here that says, it talks about being anti-racist. And this book, what I love about it is it has a glossary in it. So it has like microaggressions, it has like implicit bias, all of these words that they might hear at some point in time in their journey. It's a reference. None of this is about them reading for me. All of this is about, you need this on your bookshelf, right? And to begin to build your freedom fighter library, if you will. So that the anti-racist book had that purpose. There's another book here that talks about boss babes. So it's just talking about like people like Diana Ross and Beyonce and Lady Gaga and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It's just got little short stories about each of them and what impact they've been able to make in their particular venue and space, their vocation, right? And then I have this book, Voice of Freedom, which is about Fannie Lou Hamer. So part of what I wanted to do was to introduce some new Black heroes. So it's not just always Rosa Parks and Dr. King and Harriet Tubman, and I think that Fannie Lou Hamer, I don't know if you've heard of her, but if you ever heard the phrase, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, it came from her, right? And Fannie Lou Hamer was like this sharecropper. She was the 20th child of her parents' 20 kids. She was involuntarily sterilized at an early age. She had all of these things against her, but she heard God say to her, use your voice in a time when the Voting Rights Act was significant in the South. And she used her literal singing voice as well as her speaking voice to be able to move, and to empower a whole movement, right? So I wanted to introduce a new voice and a new face to inspire them. So they have that in their library. And then, we got some stickers and crayons. I love to give little stuff like this. I'm just all into this. So a little journal, and they had a little pack of masks right here. They gave them some N95 masks, and I decided Tootsie Rolls were going to be the official candy of the freedom fighter movement, because I just think they're so underrepresented and just so incredibly wonderful, and they're brown. So we went with that, and then I was trying to get at a soundtrack with this Kirk Franklin CD. My kids didn't have any way to play a CD. They were like, what is that? And what do we do with it? So I haven't quite figured out how to navigate the music piece, and I'm working on that, and I got some ideas about that now. So anyway, they received a package, and this t-shirt, if you can see, it has the name of Women in the Bible on it. So in the Reformed Church in America, we have a portion of the church called the Women's Transformation and Leadership. And we curated this hashtag, She Is Called, several years ago. And so when we curated that, I'm part of the Guiding Coalition for that. When we curated that, we curated these t-shirts. So there's about 7 different versions of this t-shirt with different names, and there's 2 versions in Spanish. So I wanted the girls who are part of the Reformed Church in America, whether they feel like it or not, kids often don't feel connected to their denomination, but I wanted them to be connected to the She Is Called movement. So I ordered them She Is Called t-shirts. So when we meet, we often wear those. So this was a package we had delivered to them, sight unseen, no commitment. You made the commitment that you want to be part of it. This is what we want to give you. That was our first step. And inside of that, in addition to all those things, was this half a sheet of paper that explained or helped them understand the vocation and calling of a freedom fighter. And so as you see, I don't need to go into it in detail, but just kind of saying, these are people who fought for freedom: Moses, Deborah, and then Jesus. So this is kind of like, why are we doing this? What's the biblical justification for that? We wanted to be clear about that up front. On the other side of that paper, we had a little bit of explanation of some of the things that are in the toolkit, right? So Kirk Franklin's song, Harriet Tubman, something in there about Fannie Lou Hamer, the book with Beyonce and all of them. And then, how will you use your gifts to answer God's call? So just a little, so one, 2-sided, half sheet of paper, just with some information so they can know what we're doing and have it right there before them. So we continue to try to meet via Facebook, via Zoom, to just sort of check in. We did some backyard stuff, when we could during COVID. We did something for Kwanzaa. So we just kind of tried to find some way to build community between us, and some decent repertoire until we moved into 2021, when things kind of loosened up a little bit more and we can move around. And so one of the first things we did is we traveled to Battle Creek, Michigan, to the museum, the monument, and the burial site of Sojourner Truth, which was probably about an hour away from where we live. And then on another occasion, we went to Detroit, which is 3 hours from us, to stations and to the Museum of the Underground Railroad, which is actually inside of a church. So we went to the Gateway of Freedom, where we could stand and look over into Canada, which was the aspiration and goal of enslaved people. And we processed all that together to be able to understand the role, the sacrifices, the reality of people who fought for the freedom and worked for the freedom of people besides themselves. We talked about abolitionists. We heard stories about abolitionists, about conductors on the Underground Railroad. We actually went into a place where they showed us like some different, it wasn't the exact space where people were hidden, but they had some simulation where they could kind of live and experience that. So that was very monumental for us as a group. And then last summer, we built on that by moving into a train-the-trainer model, because I'm so aware that I can't be everywhere and can't do everything. So I started thinking, okay, well, how can we increase this? And especially since like now I'm no longer the pastor at Maple Avenue, how can we help this still live amongst these young ladies and the ones who come after them? And so these 2 young ladies in the picture here with me, yes, I had less hair. are just two incredible freedom fighters who are now in 9th grade. So they're no longer in that 5th through 8th grade window. They've moved up into 9th grade, and they have just taken the work incredibly seriously. In addition to that, they are the oldest of four girls, both of them. They're best friends, and both of them have 3 younger sisters under them who are eager to become freedom fighters, right? So that all automatically gave me what I needed to say, we know this is gonna go on, even if they only teach their sisters, we know this is gonna go forward. So I asked them, would you be interested in going through a training of the actual curriculum, which we'll get to in a minute? And they said, absolutely. So we went through the training. They helped me organize things, gave their input, and their reward was they got to go on this trip with me to Memphis, Tennessee, to the Lorraine Hotel where, you know, Dr. King was assassinated, to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, to other particular sites with, you know, the blues and other things like that. So, and we visited a historically Black college, which a lot of them, you know, had never heard of. And, you know, may decide to attend or not to attend, but we wanted them to understand the history of Lemoyne Owens College and the significance of it for African-American people of history. So anyway, this is kind of stuff that we did. I'm saying that, but I know none of you live in Michigan. So it's not really necessary for me to go that much in detail, but what I'm just saying is what we did was we found out what was in our proximity that connected with the values of this project. And we took the opportunity to be able to take them there. I know in Ohio, there's the Underground Railroad Museum near Cincinnati, which is incredible. I've taken a group of kids there in the past. So I know, you know, that's there. I know that, you know, I know there's Black Beverly Hills, you know, in the LA area, you know, that has very historic. I was there not too long ago. Actually, I was candidate for church out there. And I went out there and I ended up going by the home of, boy, who was it? Anyway, I ended up going by Ray Charles' home where he used to live. And I went by the home of, I can't remember who, but another freedom fighter, African-American woman. I can't remember who it is because I'm trying to talk and think, and that's a problem. But anyway, so there's history wherever you are, and you can determine how you want to be able to plot it out. But, you know, and it's just a way to kind of contextualize it. So it's just not book, think, but it actually is interactive. And it works, again, as a great incentive. If you come every time to the meeting, if you participate, if you do extra work, whatever you want to do on the other side of it, this is what you get to experience, you know. And if then you don't want to do it, you don't take it that seriously, I don't really want to take you on a trip. I'm not saying that, but if you're not digging into the work, that's going to tell me everything about what kind of trip we're going to be able to have, right? So that has just really been really helpful for us and really exciting for our group. So again, in the curriculum itself consists of a few materials. First of all, and you'll see in the packet itself, there's a letter of commitment that basically says, I'm going to respect everybody here. I'm going to do my best to, you know, to bring my whole self to the work. I'm going to respect those who aren't here, and they actually have to sign it, and somebody else in the group has to witness it. So that's one of the first things we do when we get together. They also get a toolkit, and those materials in the toolkit can vary based on, you know, what's current. You know, there might be some things that's coming out now that you're like, oh, I really want to make sure that's there. You might go to 5 and Below. That's where I found the book with the Beyonce and all that. I went to 5 and Below and it was $3. And I was like, oh, this is great. And the price is great. You know, and so you might be able to move, you can move some of that stuff around. But I think that you want to be discerning about that. And then we have a declaration that we say every day. It basically says, like, God has called us to do something. God is calling me to do something. It's like a call and response. And then I commit to be a freedom fighter or something like that. But it's just something we say at the end of every one of our meetings that just kind of draws us in to what we're doing, what we believe God is doing in us as we go forth. So we have that. So there's supposed to be a song, which again, I couldn't get the CD situation figured out. So right now, after I had a meeting last Sunday, and after that meeting, I started thinking, you know what? I think instead of trying to give them like a whole CD, each group can have one theme song, that can be playing when they're coming in and when they're doing some of their private work, their personal work, journaling or whatever, and that they can have at the end. So I'm growing and I'm learning as I'm doing it more and more. And each session has a Bible study connected to it, and just some of the materials that you're going to need is a whiteboard or a flip note, pad, pens, markers, sticky notes, stuff like that. Icebreakers. For the first session that we have, we try to do something really light in terms of icebreakers, especially if they don't know each other. So, and in the leader's guide, there's actually 2 recommendations for icebreaker. Now, my kids in the meeting we had, in the group that's meeting right now, they had their own icebreakers. My leaders did, my high school girls. So they just brought the icebreaker that they enjoyed the most, which is just fine. I just want to offer something for people to use. And one of the ones I really like that I've used in South Africa is called Tutti Frutti. And basically people introduce themselves and they say, if I was a fruit, what kind of fruit would I be and why? And I've just did that with adults. I did it with pastors in South Africa. And there's some people I can't remember their names, but I remember that they would be a banana, and so it's sort of an inside laugh between us. So that's 2 of the things that we recommend for the first session, just as we're getting together. But for the other sessions, I have created this game. It's called Wide Awake. And basically the idea is, we talk about being woke. And to me, woke is about intellectuals, about I've read the stuff, I'm awakened to the idea of what this, racial justice and, this work is, but it doesn't necessarily translate to how I need to act or be in the world. So it just kind of gets in the head, but when it comes time, real time, for me to respond to the things that people say and sometimes do, I'm paralyzed because I don't know if I'm going to do the right thing or say the right thing. And so what the Wide Awake game is, and I was just thinking, when I redo this presentation, I'm going to show you the other side of the card, but there's 52 cards in all. And each card invites you to respond in one of 4 ways. The first way is it'll say, if you heard somebody say this, what would you think? And then everybody gets to respond. Well, I'd be thinking this. I think, are they crazy? I think, I want to get out of here. I think, people have a tendency to want to move into do or say. I'm like, no. I just want to know what's going on in your head. Because if we can understand what's going on in people's heads, sometimes we can understand why they act the way they do. The second invitation that might be dictated on the card is, what do you need to learn? So what about this particular statement, comment, scenario that's on this card might you need to learn? You might need to learn something about the context. You might need to learn something about the history of it. You might need to learn, one of the cards says, nobody of any race should ever use the N-word. So I played this game with my sorority sisters in North Carolina last year. And we were having breakfast and I pulled the cards out and that card came up. And I think the best answer I heard is somebody said, well, I would need to learn, when did it become socially acceptable for Black people to use the N-word after it had been used against them? Wow. Now the tendency of the group was to want to go to, why I think the N-word shouldn't be. And I'm like, we're not thinking here. This is, what do I need to learn? Everybody has to learn something or can learn something. So then the third thing is, so let me say, we have think, learn, say. So if I heard this, what would I say? And then finally, what would I do? So the card literally says at the top of it, underlined, it will say think, learn, say, do. And then under that, there'll be a short caption of something like, no, person of any race, just or like white privilege doesn't exist is another one of them. And so you could get either one of those cards at a time. Whoever pulls the card is the one who asks the question, and then everybody else gets to answer it. And there are a lot of different nuanced ways to play it. I've played it in a lot of different ways. I mean, the straightforward way that I've created the game is that it ultimately results in a point system. The person who gets 20 points actually is the person who's crowned most wide awake, and so it's that. But I found that when we use it as a icebreaker, like I've been doing, is I just pull a few cards out arbitrarily and just use them for conversation pieces and for learning. And I find out it's so interesting to me. I did this with an organization who does a lot of anti-racism work in the community. And the lady who led it, she was like, well, the hardest thing for me to get to is learn. Like, I don't know what you're asking me, right? But then when I ask my middle school girls, they say, the hardest thing for me is like say and do. I don't know what to say and do. And I'm like, the thing that you have the hardest time with is about you, right? And so I said to the lady for the organization, I said, maybe it's because you think you don't have anything to learn. So you might need to dig a little deeper. You need to make sure the person who is coaching and who's asking the question is gonna make you dig and not let you get off the hook and give an answer about doing or thinking because you're trying to avoid what you need to learn. So there are those 4 scenarios. So we do like 2 or 3 rounds of this in the beginning. And everybody gets to share. You know, we try to create a safe space. And these are cards that they weren't necessarily created for this work, but I like to use it for this work and use it for other things. And this is something I curated. I created the card on Canva. I created the game. I have a company that publishes the cards for me. And there's been many different ways that it has been played. So I always include this in part of the work that we're doing, whether each girl gets their own deck or whether at least our leaders get a deck that they can actually use in order to facilitate this work. And we do that. If we have extra time at the end, we might go through a couple more cards. If we don't, then the next week we'll come back to them and do a couple different scenarios. This past week, it was interesting because I wanted to talk about, you know, the recent slaying in Memphis. And I was looking at our curriculum, my girls were leading, and I was kind of like, I didn't want to get in front of them and distract them from their leadership because I'm just kind of trying to supplement. But I was leading the card game and the card came up. What would you say if you heard somebody say they should just comply with the police? So it was a great entree to me to introduce to them who hadn't even heard, some of them, of recent events in Memphis. They just had no knowledge of it. And then one of the Black girls who was there, she was talking about racism. And when I said they were Black officers, her jaw almost hit the ground. I mean, she was literally like, mouth open, could not close her mouth. And then she said this, which was so telling of the wisdom of this group. She says, that's like a reverse Uno card. I said, yes, it is. Yes, it is. You know, and so thank God by the Spirit, I believe that was able to come up so I could segue into that conversation without feeling like I was leading the room, although I'm happy to do it because I am leading the room, but I didn't have to override the leadership that I had already, I had already encouraged to be. So the Wide Awake game helps participants to process real life scenarios that diminish the esteem and flourishing of Black people with family and friends. So this is particularly about the experience of Black people. When I started creating these things, I had in mind the whole Ahmaud Arbery, the whole George Floyd thing. And I was thinking that if we can do some work on the far end of oppression as it relates to Black people, then I think that could give us some language and some leverage to actually be able to deal with some of the other levels of oppression pertaining to other people. So some of this stuff is just unapologetically Black. The other thing that I created are these things called thank you cards. Thank me later cards. Basically, they have these scenarios. People say dumb stuff to me. And I'm just like, I don't have the energy really for this, but I want to leave them with something that might be helpful. And so on one side of the card, it says thank me later. And then on the other side are these scenarios. So I was in Walgreens and one of the young ladies at my former church, she said, Pastor, my cash register person, neighbor or whatever, she touched my hair. So I went into my purse, I pulled out my packet of cards, and I pulled out a card that said, let us normalize not touching people's face, hair, or person without their permission. And it's a card that I said, just go put it on her cash register. It's not a conversation. It is not engaged. It is just so you know. And it was interesting when I was playing this with other people, how many like women remembered when they were expecting, when they were pregnant, how many people wanted to touch them and they didn't want to be touched and they wish they had such a card to be able to give to them. So there are 10 scenarios in this packet of cards that they can actually you can put on somebody's desk, you can put on their car, you can put on whatever you want to put it, just to say, hey, so, we call it thank me later because at the time it might feel confrontational to that person or it might feel like, oh, shaming, but really it's like, now you know. So later on, the next time you get ready to do it, you're going to know not to do it. And then you might come back and say, hey, you know what? Thank you for bringing that to my attention. So that's kind of sort of the idea of it. So those two things are things that we've added to the packet. So here's the schedule. Basically, I want to offer you, this is the original schedule. And then there are two alternatives that I've realized that I've had to create just for my own purposes because of the kind of trainings that I've been asked to do. There's the 5-day training, which is the one that I'm doing right now. We're going into the 4th week. This was Sunday. And this is 1.5 to 2 hours per session. And we've been doing it every Sunday we took the Sunday before King or King weekend and we watched Selma. And then the next few weeks. So we modified the first and second session, put those together so that we actually still could end up with 5 sessions, because it's 5 sessions altogether. So we put Introduction to Freedom Fighter. I need to fix that, I got a typo. But we put Introduction to Freedom Fighter and Jesus' Freedom Fighter together so that we could do Selma first and show King. But if it's not during King weekend, we probably wouldn't ordinarily have shown the movie. So anyway, we broke it into 5 sessions, one every Sunday. We meet from 2 to 4 for 5 Sundays. And this is the model: Introduction to Freedom Fighter first week, Jesus Freedom Fighter Sacrifice with Ruth and Harriet, Midwives as Freedom Fighters, and finally celebrating freedom fighting. And as I say here, you can spread this over a year. I mean, that's something that we could actually talk about. If you had a group that met like once a month, you could supplement some of these weeks with, like, if you want to do Introduction to Freedom Fighter and then you want to show Selma, you know what I mean? And then maybe you do Jesus as a freedom fighter, and, you know, then we do Ruth and Harriet, and we showed a clip from Harriet for that purpose last week. But we could do the whole movie Harriet, depending on, you know, how parents feel about content and all that. So you can stretch it out with like movie outings. You know, maybe in the summertime, you might decide to do, you know, outings for June, July, and August, and then come back in September and pick back up on the curriculum. So you could spread it out over 12 weeks and supplement those other weeks with something if you wanted to. I'm not married to really how you do it. I'm just trying to provide you some content for what might be helpful for the meat of it. And then you can spread it out the way you want to. But for this purpose, we ended up doing it once a week for 5 weeks. But I want to offer you 2 other alternatives, and I wish this was bigger. I don't know what I was thinking when I didn't make it bigger. Okay, it looks like they're gonna let me do it here. Let's see. There we go. Hey man, it's still bigger than that, but pray for me. Anyway, so another option is you could do it in one day. One day retreat. I mean, I think it's kind of bunched together, and I wouldn't recommend it, but sometimes you do. You have a, you know, you just have a day. You're like, you know, this church, we got this day, and we want to do a retreat with our young freedom fighter girls, and we're going to do it all on a Saturday, right? So this is just a proposed schedule for how that might look, how you still can fit in all the sessions in about 6 hours. It'll be, like I said, a little bit bunched together, but this is kind of a process how that happens. And when I do stuff in the summer, I don't like to start early. I don't like to end late, you know? So I'm like 10 o'clock, it's fine. It's not, you have to get up like you're going to school. You start at 10, sometimes I even start at 11, and then you can move on down through 3 or maybe 4. But after that, people want to go outside, they want to go to the beach, they want to do all kinds of things. And so that way, it's just like capsulated right in the sort of the middle of the day. You don't have to get up early, you don't have to stay all day. So that's my recommendation, but you know your people and your schedules better than I do. And then option C, which is one that I'm starting this Sunday here at my church, which is a 3-day meeting schedule. So there's a group of kids from middle school to high school who are actually going on a mission trip in 2 weeks to inner city kind of situation in Chicago. And so what we decided was we were going to use the Freedom Fighter curriculum as a way to help prompt them and prepare them to be able to be in this space in a faithful way and to see themselves as being called by God to go, as opposed to I'm just going on a trip and I don't know what I'm going to do. And so what we decided to do is break it up into 3 sessions. And I had to make some modifications because I have boys and girls in this session. And also because I got junior high school and high schoolers. So I didn't change the curriculum a lot because I don't want the curriculum to be complicated. I don't want people to have to do heavy lifting because I think that the work is heavy enough, right? To have the courage to be able to speak and to say and to do and to live into it should be the heavy lifting, not I'm trying to read this and trying to understand it and so I didn't modify actually the word so much, but I did kind of condense the curriculum in a different kind of way so that we could appeal to these meeting sessions. And you notice they're only an hour. So this Sunday, we're going to combine session 1, the Introduction to Freedom Fighter and Jesus as a Freedom Fighter, into one session. Next Sunday, we'll go into session 3, which we'll talk about Harry and Ruth as, as freedom fighters who made certain sacrifices. And then when we get to session 4, after their trip, so it'll be 1, 2, they go on their trip. And then our 3rd session will be kind of reviewing how they applied, how they lived into what they learned before they went, highlights, lowlights, and freedom fighters that they met in Chicago, whether whether actual freedom fighters or whether the museums they visited, and have them to sort of recall from me what freedom fighters they would add to their list of freedom fighters. So that's just particular. Again, this is something that I'm willing to offer to your community. If you have some nuances like that, then I'm sure you all can figure it out, right? But if you're just like, well, Denise, what would you recommend about that? That's what I want to do. That's what I want to help you think about. So typically, if you were doing you were doing 3 meetings, it would be session 1 and 2, session 3 and session 4. But because we're putting this around a particular event, then I'm turning the last session into a debrief session. Also because it's just an hour. So I want to give them an opportunity to tell me about their experience of the freedom fighter community conversation, and then also who they met and how they're fighting freedom in their own context. So these are just some options that I also want to offer based on what your time constraints are. Okay, let's see. Hopeful outcomes. Well, what we hope is that students will have a better understanding of a sense of God's calling and vocation. We hope that they would make the link between biblical characters and more contemporary, or however you spell it, O-R contemporary. There we go. Figures. I do have a doctorate degree. See the fight for racial justice as connected to discipleship, and be equipped to engage with peers on the topic of racial justice. These are the hopeful outcomes, one or all. Let's see. So that's the end of my slideshow, but I guess what I probably want to just examine just a little bit more of is the Bible studies themselves. So the first Bible study is coming from Luke chapter 4, where Jesus stands and opens the scroll. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, heal the brokenhearted, and so that's our sort of grounding in Jesus as a freedom fighter. And then part of the activities in the actual activity book invites them to circle all of the action words. That being a freedom fighter is just not a thought, but it's also an action. So there's some action words that they get to circle there. The second Bible study is about Ruth and Naomi, and the way in which Ruth sacrifices everything in order to be a freedom fighter of sorts for this widow who's returning home hopeless, basically. And so this whole thing about where you go, I will go, your God will be my God. And so we talk a lot about the sacrifices. We did this one last week, but the sacrifices that Ruth literally had to make. And the kids don't always think about the historical context of things. So some of that is in the Leader's Guide to help them understand, like, when she decided not to go back to Moab, she decided not to marry, not to have children, to be an outsider, to not be able to eat, not to, all of the things, because the Moabites were hated and they were outsiders. And so now she's deciding, and she's going to reject the God of her fathers in order to take on the God of this woman who she really doesn't know, but who's probably she's been a witness to because of the way she lived her life, right? And so trying to help them understand the greater reality of sacrifice in the ancient world. And then I showed a clip from Harriet. First I showed the video for the trailer for Harriet that Cynthia Yervo does. And it gives you some nice clips from the movie so they don't have to watch the whole movie, but it gives some, and the song is just, it's just powerful. I'll stand up, take my people with me. I don't sing for people because I don't know how to sing. But anyway, it's just really, really, really powerful. So it gets them really charged. And then there's this little clip that I show when Harriet is walking through the woods with the people, and all of a sudden she has this vision from God, and she falls on her knees and she goes into this trance. And the other people who are trying to go to freedom, she's trying to carry, they're wondering, what's going on? We got to go, we got to go, we got to go. And everybody's saying, and the people who know her are saying, nope, let her commune with God. And then when she comes out of the trance, she says to them, we can't go that way. It's danger. And they say, which way should we go? We should go that way. And then you see them going, crossing the water and going over toward freedom. So, so it just concretizes this image of God's calling, right? And it's not in church. It's not in a churchy way. It's not sort of a religious way, but it is God entrenching her vocation and her purpose right in the presence of these people and proving God's faithfulness in her following of that. And so then we have some conversations about that. So that's the second. And then the third one is on Puah and Shiphrah, the midwives in Exodus, who the Bible says the midwives, they feared God more than Pharaoh. and they decided that they weren't going to kill the male children, and actually lied, and to say that they couldn't get there in time. And so we talk about that, and we talk about that from the perspective of birth work. I'm a doula. I'm a certified doula. My daughter's a certified doula, and she's also training to be a midwife. So we juxtapose her story with Pooh and Schiffer's story. So her vocation along with their vocation, and how Pooh and Schiffer, because what they did may not have seemed that significant by them deciding to let these babies live. But because she was able to do that, Moses was able to live. And therefore Moses could carry the people into the promised land. And so her vocation, their vocational work might seem insignificant, but actually it's incredibly significant for the grand scheme of what God's plan is, right? And so that's the lesson we'll wade into this week. And then the last week is kind of like a celebration of freedom fighters. So sort of we go back and we talk about what we learned. They make some bracelets. They'll do some thank you cards. And the last piece I didn't tell you about, which is why you need the whiteboard and sticky notes, is that in each session there's a part where they add sticky notes to a board that responds to whatever that lesson is. So one week they use like yellow sticky notes, and you just have to write like all the action words that you think it takes to be a freedom fighter. Whatever. And then there's next week when you talk about like, what are the other things that they might need, like courage, like faith, like hope, that aren't necessarily action words, but still are attributes and still things they need. So that'll be in a different color. And then they draw pictures that self-portraits of themselves, and they stick that on it. So now you got 3 different color sticky notes. And then ultimately on that last day, they'll all have 11 by 7 piece of paper, and they can actually capture with their markers and with their colored pencils, whatever words on there that fit with them. There's a logo that the freedom fighters have. So the logo will be in the middle, and they can write all their other things around it. And we will laminate that, and it will become kind of like a vision board, but also like a placemat, because we want to do a vision board. But I'm like, kids don't have a kind of room in their room, just have a board sitting somewhere. So we thought, well, if we could do it like 11 by 17, have them laminated, they could even put their laptop on it, but it would just always be there before them. So that's kind of what the end of our project looks like. And then, I see this really as not a means to an end, but a means to a beginning. This is a way for us to gather again around common language, around common understanding about vocation. And then we start to build our program. So now we're starting to talk about, okay, what are we going to do this summer? So now we recognize Kwanzaa is coming. My girls, freedom fighters, they introduced the table at Kwanzaa for the community celebration, right? And so they're grounded sort of in this idea that how I'm living and how I'm responding in the world is out of God's calling for me. I'm not just a social justice warrior, right? I'm not just, a good liberal who's doing good liberal things, but I'm actually responding to the call of God and wanting to walk forward in a way that is faithful. And then we start to build our calendar around what our regular meeting is going to be. So we're going to continue to meet once a month. And then during that time, we'll be able to continue to play the game, and we'll be able to continue to look at what's going on in the news, in the media, what movies are coming out, what kind of discussions do we need to have in order to continue to cultivate that in them. So that's basically the presentation. I'm gonna see if I can come back to you. And it was a little bit longer than I thought it would be, but I think it was like kind of drinking out of a fire hose. So I apologize for sending it to you so fast, but I really want to hear your reflections, your thoughts, and certainly your questions.
I invite anyone to just unmute yourselves and
Can I say?
Yeah, great. Okay. Please go.
Is that okay? Okay. So last year was my first year teaching I usually teach anywhere from 40 to 70-year-olds, just kind of that vocation in life. Yet last year was my first year that I taught teens. And I remember this unison anger from some of the teens, just angry. Some of them just didn't want to be there. And I remember smiling. And I remember asking myself, why am I comfortable with this anger? Right? I'm just like, bring it. It's okay. Right. And I liked what you mentioned at the beginning, that you were able to notice some of these feelings that are coming in. Right. And I guess my question for you is a theological grounding of, is anger appreciated, right? Where do we see anger? Is it holy?
I think it is. I absolutely think it is. You still talking? Okay. Yeah, I absolutely think it is. I haven't, I guess because I'm already their pastor and I kind of have a relationship with them. I'll be interested to see like the group that I meet with this week, that I start with this week, how that might bubble up. But I mean, I'm not in youth group with them all the time, but I did do a retreat with them. They know who I am. They respect me in a lot of ways, you know. So I don't know if that might crop up as much, but I think there must be room for righteous indignation. I think that's part of, and as a matter of fact, let me not say that, because I will say that when we went to, you know, the Underground Railroad and we were learning some of the history and the things that people had gone through, and when we went to the museum in Detroit and the museum in Memphis, there was a lot of anger amongst these kids. And even if it wasn't like, because it was only my two freedom fighters who went to Memphis, but we went with a whole bus of African-American grassroots organization that we partnered with, so that, you know, we could get the bus together and do that. And so it was interesting because my two girls are the only two white girls on the bus. All the rest of the kids, because it's a Black organization. So all the kids on the bus, and these two girls who go to the whitest Christian school in the world, where Betsy DeVos went. My son goes there too, by the way, so I can judge it a little bit. But these two girls who never had to know what it meant to be in the minority were suddenly in a minority. They didn't know the songs, they didn't know the jokes, they didn't know anything, you know, and they told me how much they appreciated that experience unto itself. Like they would never have experience. So that's an aside. But what they got to experience though, was to see their Black, brown counterparts experience anger and outrage at some of the things that they witnessed in this museum, or that they witnessed, you know, particularly at the Lorraine Hotel, as they tell the story of King and his assassination. They became outraged because in some sense their counterparts were outraged. And I welcome that. And I also demonstrate that. And so, you know, I think that that's the best thing we can do, is to demonstrate healthy emotions. And then to talk to our kids about like ways to channel that, right? Like this is the place where you can be angry about that. I know you go to school and they tell you you can't, and you might need to keep it together. But when you come here, you can express that, or if not, model for them. You know, when you get to your bedroom, you can put your head in a pillow or whatever. But I think we have to be able to allow people to express anger. I think it's important to the gospel. I think that when I read the prophets, there's all kinds of, some of the stuff that we just did a study in my Bible study on Hosea. Oh my gosh. I mean, some of the things that were coming out, you know, I mean, I think that anger is appropriate in the face of injustice. So I think whatever you can get them opportunity to live into that in a healthy way, then do it. Absolutely.
Part of what I love about what you're saying is I think you're taking anger and deepening it. You know what I mean? Like letting it connect to what's really important. Because sometimes teens get treated by adults as, oh, you're just being petulant. And they can lean into that. Like if that's how people read it, they could just go there. But what you're saying is, here, let me show you, like, here's a whole vein of really deep things to be angry about. And here's a way to talk about it and live it. And
Yeah. Well, I think the how you approach, the way the lesson is written, it's not sort of sensational. You know, it's not trying to evoke anger. It's trying to evoke discussion, you know, trying to marry the biblical text with how that fits in the real world with real life people. But it's not fit for that. So if anger arises out of what we do, then it must be something that's already in there, because the curriculum itself is not designed. I mean, I do have some methods and ways of trying to evoke anger in some places, right? But it's not designed necessarily with that sort of intention. But I think it can rise up when it comes to the game. I mean, especially in mixed company sometimes. You know, you Black people hear this and it triggers something in them, and then they want to take it out on somebody else. And that's where our agreement helps in the beginning too, to be able to say, listen, we're going to respect everybody in the room. You can feel how you want to feel, but you need to speak for yourself. You need to honor this other person's in the room, you know. So that's where the agreement in the beginning really, I think, sets the stage for mutual respect in the midst of our anger. Thanks for that question.
And I think, Denise, that was one of many things I really appreciate about this whole curriculum is the ways that you're inviting these young people to engage all different senses, right? This is not just an academic, intellectual look at the call of freedom fighter, but everything from the like your intentional use of music to the Tootsie Rolls that they're tasting, right? And drawing and reading together. That too, I feel like would create a space in which young people feel more free to express some emotions or just express themselves in ways that aren't just limited to like words on a page.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's part of the intention, because like everybody doesn't think that. I don't know where these people are academically or cognitively. I mean, most of them, I've been around them enough, especially with this particular group. I've been around them enough to kind of recognize that. I know some of them put up real resistance to reading a book, and others of them are bookworms and have no idea what's going on Netflix at all. And I know that I have that range. And so some of them are artists. So there's a page where it says, after we watched the clip from Harriet, we're like, well, just sketch or jot or draw any image that came to mind for you when you watch this clip. And one of the young ladies who's sitting beside me was like, you want me to do what? You just want me to draw something? Whereas there was another young lady who I know is an artist type, she was already at work creating her thing, And so I said, well, you don't have anything you want to draw? You don't have to draw anything. You don't have to do anything. You can just sit there, whatever. I was like, but, we want to allow opportunities for all of the things. And some people be more drawn to this than that. When we watched Selma, I felt so badly because I was like, I know they're bored. Like, this is a boring part of this movie. I don't want to watch this. But then I remember when I was a kid, how many movies I had to watch because history was important. And I had to sit there and I had to watch it. They weren't whining. They weren't complaining because they're compliant and they want to be there. And I mean, I think that's the other thing too, with us doing Brown Girl Dreaming. And then after that, allowing them to opt into it was really, really important for me to say, if you don't want to be here, you don't have to be here. That might not be the option, Sunday when I come in, because they may not want to be there, but you want to go on this trip. And if you want to go on this trip, I need for you to understand that it's important that you recognize what God is calling you to as you make this trek. That it's not just you wanted to go because it's a good time, but that perhaps God is stirring in a different way. And if that gets kind of boring to you for seconds a moment, you'll be fine. But I'm going to try to keep the modalities rolling so that if I miss you here, maybe I can pick you up over here. Thanks.
Stephen, Julie, Catherine.
Denise, thank you so much. One of the things I loved about what you were saying was how just thorough this is in so many aspects of folks' lives, and like connecting to them in these ways that are relevant and real for them. I'm trying to get this webcam. I'm sorry, it's like way up here, so I know I'm like looking out into outer space. But I also loved the Bible stories that you used. And I wanted to ask if any resonated in any particular ways, like with Shipra and Pua, are there theological connections that you see students make? And, does it also sort of strengthen connection with church, with their relationship with God and their, sort of faith journey? Have you seen that be an outgrowth of making all these kinds of connections? So I was just thinking also about that really deep community building that you're doing with sending this beautiful package that is like so attentive to their full self, like who they are in this world, of interest and care.
Yeah. I think it depends on the facilitation too, which is why it would be a lot different if I come to your context, right? And I was to do this thing. It would be different than if you were to do it in your context with the relationships that you have. Now I have the capacity, I'm pretty agile. So I can move around in a lot of different spaces and be a lot of different things and read the room pretty well. And so you wouldn't be too disappointed. But I think that part of the thing is that I am the pastor to these girls. They're already in church. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to convince them to come to church or stay with church. Some of them go to Christian schools, right? And they're there and their parents want them to be there and they're eager to be. So that makes such a difference, I think, in the ways that they integrate this into their relationship to the church, that the church is taking the time to help them understand something beyond churchy type stuff. Matters of justice that they might have been curious about, that they're now actually receiving tools for. So I think that level of engagement, I think their parents are able to reinforce that at home too, because their parents are just so full of joy that they have this tool and that I'm facilitating it for them. It feels kind of exclusive, like every, little girl in the world's not here. My daughter is, you know what I mean? And so that's part of the benefit of them working with me. And so I don't have that push-pull. I think it does strengthen their relationship with the church, because we don't make this something else. Like, okay, well, we got church stuff, but then, and even since I'm not at the church anymore, to still continue the relationship with them and continue the relationship with the church, I had to do a year separation because that's in the paperwork, but as soon as that year was up, the church was like, come on, come back home. We'd love to see you, and so, I mean, I think that all of that it depends on who is administering it, honestly, and who your crowd is, right? So if you have a bunch of church kids, lean into that. If you're doing it with some kids who aren't necessarily churched, what I propose is consider it as a story. I even have in the what do you call it? In the statement that we make, proclamation, at the end of it, it says something like that God has given us. And then I have like a bracket and it says, if it's interfaith, you can leave that part out. Because I want it to be optional. I want to be able to respect that, because it's still vocation and calling. If you don't know who's calling you, that's on you. And prayerfully, hopefully, you can come to some curiosity about who is calling you to do this work through the curriculum. But I'm willing to take that off the table and just talk about Jesus, a freedom fighter, whether you believe in Jesus or not. I want to talk about Pooh and Schiffer as midwives and the work they do alongside the work that my daughter does as a midwife. And you don't have to know any of the three. But it's still true. It's somebody who's doing their work, their everyday job, not church job, not pastor, not deacon, but it's somebody who's doing their everyday work, considering it a call and making a difference in the world by it. So, I mean, that's certainly it's not intended for that. I mean, like I couldn't do it at a public school, which I wanted to, but you can't say Jesus, even if Jesus is, a historical figure, can't do that. So I'm like, okay, fine. I'm not willing to take Jesus out. Because that's first and foremost. But so yeah, again, I hope that answers your question. I think it depends on who's facilitating it, and it depends on who the group is that you're actually working with, whether or not it makes those ties. And then I think, I feel like when you approach the curriculum, fill in the gaps. You know your context better than I do. I'm not policing what you do, right? So fill in the gaps. If you feel like your people are ready to tie some knots between, premillennial and postmillennial, if you can put all that in there together, then you can make it happen.
I love that.
If you think they're ready for it, you know what I mean?
Yeah. That's so thoughtful. That's such a thoughtful way. And even just the way that you're, that expansiveness around vocation. So this is like such specific work, like these concepts are so clear and I feel like can translate into these different contexts, but it's a really nice both kind of focus and expansion in all these different ways. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah,
Good.
Yeah. And then, well, I wanted to make it more streamlined, which is why it's really 5 lessons, but I actually have like 3 more like supplemental, ones. And I mean, because I'm a preacher and want to be sometime biblical scholar kind of person. So it's not hard to look at these biblical figures and sort of attach to them something that has to do with vocation, and then find somebody in the world who's doing the same thing. So, I mean, that's something that you can add on yourself, or,
Thank you.
Tell me about your context. I mean, like, tell me about each of you, where you are, and the particular group that you have in mind when you think about this particular project.
I just quickly wanted to add that I like the sustainability of the language of vocation within this realm of work, because in my work that I do, seeing and have been seeing for the past 3 years, a lot of burnout, complete burnout, when it comes to anything that have to do with trying to do social justice work as individual silo. And when we talk about vocation and we weave together this idea that this is bigger than me, myself as an individual, and it's grounded on something that has a legacy, that I'm not first, that I'm a part of something bigger, I think it just creates the opportunity for sustainability rather than complete utter burnout after a few years of attempting to do this work.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Well, you know, just as I've been thinking about that and developing it too, as I'm talking about the expansive, if you decided you wanted more weeks, you could surely bring in somebody who's in law enforcement who also is living out their faith in that way. So when you talk about, you know, Jesus in the, you know, recovery site to the blind, or, you know, somebody's an ophthalmologist, bring them in and they're a person of faith, and they can come in and talk about how they actually integrate their faith with what they do. So there's also like guest speakers that you could bring in who can basically tell that story and marrying those things together. So people start thinking about, how do I actually live my life out as a Christian, as a believer in Jesus, not just like, what can I do to serve the church? And then what can I do to make money in the world? You know, so you can bring in people, guest speakers, with a little lunch or with a little something to come in and to help marry those things together. So we start to raise up, and as I said earlier, if we don't raise them up, we won't have them. So we can actually raise up freedom fighters who are thinking about inhabiting the varying spaces in our community and, you know, in our global property, you know, that actually starts to look like and act like, you know, Jesus in the world, which is ultimately what we want. And maybe that would bring people back to church. But if it doesn't bring people back to church, it surely will populate. It will populate the world with Jesus people.
I'm thinking about the fact that I often work with adults, and one of the things, you know, I was so intrigued by the fact that you use this as a kind of training or an experience for people to have before doing a mission trip. And I just thought this would be great for so much of this kind of social justice work that people do in the community, whether they're serving meals at a place where people are unhoused or whatever. Just that curiosity, you know, with the cards that you use. What do I have to learn here? Like, I just wish everybody could go into ministry in the world with that question in their heads. And so there's just so many aspects of this that I think could work across different age groups
Yeah.
really
You
well.
know, I'm gonna tell you about a couple other products that a couple other things that I have. So my doctoral work is actually about interrogating outreach practices in the American church, from a posture of outreach to a posture that looks like embracing, which mirrors the way Jesus shows up in the narratives in John's gospel. And so this is a 4-step model. So this is what I do with adults who are preparing to go on mission trips, whether they're going to me in South Africa or if they're going to Flint with me to take out water or whatever. I have this whole training that they go through for that part. I haven't modified that for young people. So this is kind of like my trying to get young people on board to really thinking about the ways of Jesus. And then I have this other project, which really talks about the ways in which we objectify poor people and sort of like, you know, use them as things and not thous, and to use verbal language, you know, and so there's like a 4-step process to that I lead people through. So I do that mostly with groups, people going on mission trips, people who really want to reframe and deconstruct the ways that we've thought about working with unhoused people, or thought about, you know, working with, you know, orphan children or people who have been marginalized. And so there's a whole like process around that could be another conversation if you have people in your cohort, or, you know, that would say, you know, we've got some adults that need some stuff, you know, that's something that I would highly, highly recommend. Not that you can't modify the freedom fighter thing for that, but just with respect to the fact that it's created for kids. And I'm sure adults could learn from it, just like kids could learn from the embracing training. But I think the embracing training is more theologically rooted. I think that it's more pointed toward a person of more mature faith and a person who has a lot more access to move around in community. It's more of a deconstruction and a reconstruction around that. And then I have right now, the project I'm working on right now, and I got to get a digital, what do you call it? what you call it, a digital, anyway, somebody else to help me, because I am a storyteller. I'm a storyteller. I love the Bible. I love to tell stories about the Bible. I am not an artist, but I have this urgency within me to finish a activity book for boys to become freedom fighters, to end gender-based violence against girls. And part of my vision for this project is not only to create the book for here, but to have it translated into Sesotho, so I can take it to South Africa, to my community there, where gender-based violence is the highest in the world. The whole project is based on the story of Absalom and Tamar. It's called Abe the Freedom Fighter. So we call him Abe, Absalom Abe. And he basically tells a story about himself and who his sister is and how his sister goes. It's very age appropriate. It's like third to fifth grade. So it's just like, the brother is sick. She goes in to take something to make him feel better. Instead of him being grateful, it just says he attacked her and threw her out of the house. And then it's like a multiple choice. Well, if you guess my dad, the king, guess what he did? And it was like, comforted my sister, punished my brother, da-da-da. Then the fourth thing is nothing. And he's like, if you chose D, you chose right. He did nothing. That's when I knew I needed to become a freedom fighter, right? And then basically the principles going forward are based on his name. So all you have to remember is Abe. And the A is like, always be the first to walk away. Always ask before you touch a girl's hair or person or thing, and then the B stands for, be a friend, be ready to speak up if it's necessary, be ready to tell somebody who's safe, right? And then the E is expected to be difficult, expected to take courage. And then the last page is him saying, like, whenever I have to do something hard, I just pray. And then he's like down on his knees praying, and it's a prayer. He says, pray with me. And then he's praying, Lord, help me to be a freedom fighter to end violence against girls. So, so that's like the next important project that I'm trying to get out, because I just think that, well, I know if we don't teach our boys not to rape, they will rape. If we don't teach them not to touch, they will touch. Period. Like what else? We can see that. History shows, everything shows that, culture, everything. And so we need to be deliberate about making that a vocational, right, commitment to say, I will be a freedom fighter. He's a little cool dude, hat to the back, karate guy, I will be committed to, not seeing girls be assaulted because they're girls. So those are a couple other things that, kind of have working in the background right now that might be beneficial for you and for your work sometime in the future. The embracing thing, which is sort of a training for adults, is 4-step training. It can be done in a day. It can be done over several evenings, like 2-hour sessions, probably like 4 or 5 sessions. It can be done like that via Zoom. And then the Abe, the Freedom Fighter, will probably be in magazine or comic book form or something like that. And I'd like to, once I get the graphic designer, that's the word. Once I acquire a graphic designer, I need to bring life to the words and the prophetic call onto the page, then I'll be able to produce that and be able to offer that out to whosoever will. So these products, I don't know if you had an opportunity to visit my 1 Corinthians 13 page. Anybody?
Have you?
A little bit, okay.
No, I would like for you to explain like how they can find what you've got, and yeah.
So again, during 2020, shortly after the George Floyd thing, I was absolutely outrageous. And I was sitting on my bed and I was screaming at God, like, how long are Black people going to continue to be oppressed? Is it us? Is it something we need to confess? Is it something? And the Lord spoke to me in a way that God speaks to me and says, no, it's not that. It's just that America's never loved Black people. Now, hear me now, because when I say that, sometimes people think, well, I'm saying white people never love Black people. I'm saying America. I'm saying we haven't loved ourselves well. And so that's when I started coming to this conclusion, sort of thesis, that if 1 Corinthians 13 is the barometer for loving, if love is patient and love is kind and doesn't envy and doesn't, then America indeed does not love Black people. And that the church in America has been complicit in the unloving. And so what I set out to do, and this is just crazy because it just started coming to me, and people started coming, a couple of my friends started coming along, and some people in the denomination, and helping me just cultivate and fine tune and clarify what you will see on that page. And basically what it is it's a process, it's a project, and it's ultimately products to help us get back to the loving, or get to the loving for the first time. So the process, basically, you'll see this on the page. It invites us as a church, as the church, to rehearse, remind, and remember the unloving practices. And the rehearsing is to actually dig in the soil of our institutions, our churches, our communities, to determine what are the ingredients in the soil that continues to grow fruit of unloving. And then to move on from rehearsing to basically examine that until we, like the prophet, declare, woe is me, until our hearts are broken. Not just look at it like that's too bad, but almost like the sister was saying, like almost to the point where we become angry, we become outraged within ourselves, like the prophet, to say, what? Whoa, that's a broken heart, right? And it takes a broken heart, a contrite spirit, right, that the Lord would not despise. And true repentance requires that broken heart. So now that you have the broken heart, the next thing is the reminding, and it's RE-minding, coming from Romans 12. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So this is when we start reading new books, watching new movies. We start doing the reconstruction work, right? And start putting new ingredients, if you will, into the soil so we can change the soil and ultimately to be able to grow something that is loving, right? And then finally, remember, literally remember, bring back into membership those that we have said, I have no need of you for. And then ultimately the suggestion, and I think I'm convinced that if we can center the health, healing, and wholeness of Black people in particular, then the whole community can flourish. So it's called what is it? Centering the health, healing, and wholeness of Black people for the flourishing of the entire community. That's the whole idea of the process. So when you go to that website, you'll see a bunch of tabs there. There'll be a tab that has a survey on it. The survey will actually bring you to a place where you can sort of assess maybe where you are on this continuum that I'm measuring to determine if you're at like a not now, not yet, not ever place in terms of this work. And if that's where you are and you don't want to stay there, you'll get back some resources that'll say, read this, watch this movie, that might help. The next movement is ally. So if you're an ally, it'll tell you this is your allyship. This is where you fall on ally. These are some things you can do to move along to be what we call a freedom fighter. And then the last thing some people call accomplices, you know, that for me, for my work, that last stage is a freedom fighter. And what that freedom fighter needs in order to make disciples of themselves, there's also some resources that get kicked back for that. So that's the survey. And then you'll see the platform that actually has the process, the rehearse, the remind, the remembering, the Bible studies that go with that, the scripture that goes with that, the justification that goes with that, the lectures and conversations that I've had with people about that, all that's on the page. There's a whole nother tab that's just keeping Black people breathing, which Black people, you know, can go to in particular to find meditative practices or books that lead to wholeness, or postures, or all sorts of things that will lead to their wholeness, playlists, all of that. And then there's also a link that will have products. And that's where the instruction for the wide awake games are. You can't order right now through that website. You have to email me directly to get order of the cards. But eventually you will be able to order through the website. You can order the Thank Me Later cards. You can order the Wide Awake cards, and then the coloring book the activity book will be there. And I also curated a coloring book called When We Were Queens and Kings, basically helping Black children understand that, you know, that we weren't born slaves. We weren't born enslaved people in America. Our story doesn't go back to slave ship. It actually goes back to when we were queens and kings. It actually gives names and a little bit of stories about who those queens and kings were. Some of them, how they connected to biblical texts. And then there's a couple little puzzles and little things in that book too. So at some point in time, you'll be able to get all four of those things on that page. But for right now, you have to email me to be able to get those. Yep. I've been busy.
You have been busy for the welfare of a lot of other people. Thank you.
Thank God for that. Thank God for that.
I am currently working with one of the Culturalized and Meaning and Purpose projects in Louisville, Kentucky. And I just started a teaching job at a seminary in Chicago. So most of my contacts are with seminarians and training and teaching pastors. And I was so struck about just thinking about how much work it is to create a syllabus and a curriculum, and the way that you have built in just such expansiveness to be able to really fit this into different communities and contexts. So I love that. And like thinking what you said about, well, I was thinking, oh, like, who are the other biblical figures who you think are freedom fighters against oppression in these ways? Or whose story do you draw inspiration from, and bringing it into that conversation around racial justice and around fighting for racial freedom? And it also did that. What was the card that it was like "Thank Me Later"? Is that was that
Hashtag
it?
thank me later.
Yeah, I wonder if you would just say just a little bit more about that. I was just really struck by that. Yeah.
Well, it just really came from my own experience of microaggressions. All of this stuff, everything that's on these cards, though that card and the game card are real experiences that I have had, right? But that really just came out of this, just this idea of like, people ask me things that they could find out on their own, or expect me to be a teacher when I'm not. I'm exhausted. So one of the cards says, unlike me, Google can't be triggered. Ask it anything, right? Because there are things I don't know. You ask, what does that mean? I'm going to go look it up. Then I have to come back and tell you when you could have looked it up yourself, right? I mean, I'm mostly dealing with people who have at least bachelor's degrees, right? So these are just like real life scenarios that takes the burden off of the people who are actually carrying the burden in the first place, and it's a little snarky, a little bit, but I think in the long run, it's going to keep somebody from getting sued, assaulted, full of shame. You know what I mean? It's real. The real truth is that if you take serious what the cards are really trying to teach you, then it's really going to save a lot of heartache in the long run. And that's really my goal, right? My goal is to, in whatever loving ways and practices necessary, to be able to equip the body of Christ or the people in my community to be able to act in loving ways toward one another. And there's just some things that's just like, one of the cards says something like giving a greeting in someone's language is better than a hug. People are like, I don't know how to, when I go to South Africa, I don't know how to say that. Try. Because just your try. We have some Afghan refugees, that we have a family been working with, and went over their house and delivered some diapers. They just had a baby. I mean, it's not the easiest. It's very vulnerable to try to speak in somebody's language, but it's vulnerable to come all the way from Afghanistan to a country where nobody speaks your language. And now I want to go ahead and give you a hug and tell you how great you are, when if I could just learn how to just simply say hello and thank you and goodbye in your language, it just goes a long way, So it's about these kind of cards. There's 10 of them in a pack. But there's these kind of cards, stereotypes, what I say, something like avoid, not entrench, right? Or like one of them was like fat phobia hurts, and people just, oh, look at her, da, 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 da. I'm just gonna slide you this card and just say, listen, that's fat phobia. That hurts somebody. Maybe you didn't think about it. Maybe you did. Maybe you don't care. That's why I don't have to hang around. I'm just leaving the card with you. So now you can't say you didn't know. And I'm going on to the next thing, because if I'm going to hang around and have this conversation with you, it's probably not going to go well, because you're probably not in a place where you're ready to listen. And you might be in a place to tell me you don't care. And now I might be putting myself in a situation where I'm going to be further injured by your unconcern. So I'm not going to put myself in a place where I'm going to be injured or have to expend any extra energy. I'm going to leave a blessing face down. On the top, all you see is thank me later. What is this? By the time you turn it over and read it, I'm gone. And then maybe that person there in my office or whatever, they come back and they say, well, I got the card, I want to talk about it. I want to have a conversation. It's up to me to decide if I want to or not. But in real time, I don't have to do that. The burden's not on me. I might not have the energy for it right then, So yeah, so that's the whole concept of it. And yeah, it comes in this really cute like leather pouch. I should have brought all of this little stuff, but I changed purses and that's bad. But it comes in like a little leather pouch. And so you open it up and on the top it has thank me later. And on the back of that card, it has the instructions of how you can use it. And then on the bottom part, it has the 10 cards tucked away into it. And they look like they're business card sizes. Basically, that's what they are. I just ordered business cards, but I just took the time to type all of these things on it and had them printed through Vistaprint, and that's all they are. Yeah, and I sell them. I mean, just because, like I said, switch purses, but I usually don't leave home without having at least a pack in my purse somewhere because I never know when something's going to happen and I want to be able to respond to it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Denise, this is just so fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for these insights and for sharing your wisdom with us.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And so we really appreciate you and all that you have to offer.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome. Well, you let me know, how we might be able to do this work together. Or if there's, any other way that we can elevate, the vocation that God's calling us all to, in a world where I feel like we often sleep on the job as a church. It gives us an opportunity to walk around and be wide awake and be light bearers that can wake us all up to the ways of Jesus, which is what we all want to live into.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's really well said. Thank
Yeah.
you.
You're
Thanks.
welcome.
And Stephen and Catherine, I know you're aware of some of our upcoming other conversations with Ellie Rocher and Kevin Lawley, Yishan, as we continue to explore some of these themes of calling, embodiment, anti-racism. So you're very welcome to that.
Good.
Yeah, thanks to all of you for being here. And Denise, I'm once again just so in awe of, really, as Catherine said, your ability to scaffold this and to set about developing a how for people. Like, it's one thing to think I should be as light in the world. It's another thing for somebody to say, okay, and here's 4 steps for helping you get there that are really profound, that are really like each piece is so significant. And we're just really thankful.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for being open to me sharing these things that are so close to my heart that God has trusted me with. Like you might think I'm smart. I'm not that smart, but God trusts me. And so I'm grateful for you to be able to share in with a bit of what God trusts me with and to be able to stay on a journey with you in whatever way. So thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks all of you. Take care this weekend.
All right.
Bye-bye.
You also. God bless you. Take care. Bye.